Hey gang, Nath here from Headwear Games. In today's devlog we're going to focus on sound design. I've recently started adding some of the audio stuff to my survival horror game Hollowbody, and I thought it'd be fun to give you a bit of insight into my process. Sound design is something that I sort of stumbled my way into. I used to work in film production, both with a team and freelance. I'd be making stuff like corporate promo videos, music videos, and step-by-step guides to various different things, so it's an area I have a bit of prior experience in. Obviously, sound design is really important when it comes to video production, and these are also skills that translate nicely over to game design. Now, firstly, I wanted to get something out of the way. Sound design isn't super hard. It's relatively straightforward, but it's something you need to approach carefully. Compared to all the other elements of game design, it's probably the one I find has the quickest results. It has the least amount of steps between thinking, I need to do this task, and having the task done. It's quite quick, but there are a few things you need to be cautious of when designing sounds for a game. Probably one of the most common bits of feedback I got when it came to Chasing Static, my previous game, was how much people enjoyed the immersive sound design of the game. Now, I can't take full credit for that. A huge contributing factor to the overall vibe of that game was the incredible soundtrack created by Soto Yoto. Links to their Bandcamp and the game's soundtrack and stuff in the description below. But sound design is different to music, and often with games you'll actually benefit from having breaks in the music to allow the soundscape to shine. Music is great for establishing mood. Sound design, that is, the sound effects in the game, are there to add immersion. So how do we approach this? Well, it's an iterative process that involves sourcing a lot of different sounds, tweaking their characteristics to suit the given situation, and often combining multiple sounds together to create something new. Let's start with a little gameplay example. Please bear in mind that this project is very much work in progress. Lots of what you see here is a bit rough around the edges and is subject to change. I'm also going to be talking over this live, so please excuse me if I start to ramble. Cool, let's go. Right, so probably the first thing you'll notice is the footstep sounds. That's hard to say. The footstep sounds are based on how fast you're walking or running, and the surface that you're walking on. Now, the way I handle this is in Unity, you can set animation events on animations. Excuse the loud overhead lights. I've got the volume set a little bit higher to sort of illustrate the point there, but we'll get onto that later. So, animation events. Basically, whenever Mika plays an animation, for example her walking, I'm able to set in the animation file within Unity on which keyframe I want to send events from. Now, events, as we mentioned in the last video, events are great for sort of communicating between systems. Playmaker supports events. It's always listening for events. So when you run an animation and send an event from that animation, whatever the audio source component is attached to, it will send an event to that game object. In this case, it's Mika. As we mentioned before, all of Mika's gameplay systems are all tied to her player character, because that goes everywhere that you play, so it's the same for the sounds. Now, I've got an FSM on Mika, which is listening for these events, and when it gets an event, it raycasts down underneath her feet, and whatever the raycast hits, whatever collider it hits, it checks the tag of that collider, and the surface will be tagged appropriately for the sound. So for this kind of concrete flooring in the hallway here, if I run it's a bit louder, it's just like a basic fuddy kind of concrete noise. But then if we run down here, and you'll see there's like a pile of muck on the floor up here. If I run across that, you get this kind of slightly soggy, crunchy, wet noise. These are all sounds that I've sourced from a website called Zapsplat, which is a great name. Zapsplat is a massive subscription-based audio library. It's really cheap and it has really high-quality sounds to use for your games or video projects or whatever you like. So, something I find when sourcing sounds for the game on Zapsplat or other websites, often recordings are not great, so you have to, like, Zapsplat's pretty good for it. They've got some, like, generally quite a high barrier of quality for their recordings, so most of them don't have annoying background noises or need too much cleaning up. But frequency is something you have to be aware of. You don't want too much high end for certain sounds, you don't want too much low end for certain sounds. So for example, these footstep sounds, when I downloaded them, they were really bassy. Someone's put a mic on the ground and then they've just stood next to the mic and made footstep sounds. Which is good because there's a lot of room for editing, but for a game like this, it was important to cut out a lot of that low end. And what you do there is you add a low pass filter on the sound and you can cut out the low end. I'm not like an expert with sound, I just sort of know the basics enough to get me by. But yeah, something else you'll notice when walking around is the buzz of these overhead lights. The camera's quite high in Hollowbody when you're navigating like this, when it's not a fixed camera perspective. And it was just neat having like an electrical hum, sort of. When you're wearing headphones, it feels like it's going over the top of your head, which is pretty cool. And this sound is also tied to a Playmaker FSM that controls the light flicker, and whenever it's changing the value of the light intensity, it's also changing the volume for the sound. So it's kind of two birds with one stone. Works pretty well. Now if we go in this room... Oh, hold up. Okay, yeah, I had that room disabled because when I was working in the editor, I'm working on another bit of the building at the moment, and that room has some stuff that was getting in the way of me like clicking on things. So I had it turned off. These things happen. I've turned it back on now, so we should be able to enter. There we go. Mika's legs are kind of weird. That's to do with the IK on the feet. I need to fix it. It's like when you teleport a character from one place to another, you have to tell the game to update the feet IK. And currently I'm doing it manually for each transition. I haven't done it for this. But I need to like work out a way that's better, like, than having to manually update the feet every time I teleport the character somewhere. It doesn't matter. I'll fix it later. There's loads of stuff that's unfinished in this. It's all work in progress, so you have to bear with me. So this is... I like this one. This light is cool. This one flickers on and off a lot. You can kind of hear the bulb clicking as it turns on and off. Like I say, a lot of these sounds will probably be toned down a bit in the actual game. I'll do like a final pass on everything, but at the moment I'm just trying to fill up as much of the spaces with sound. This one's good. Yeah, little TV there. What else can I show you? So yeah, like I say, all these are 3D sounds. There's Unity, just like by default, you can set sounds to 3D or 2D, and you can actually set them somewhere in between, so you can have the sound bleed completely central in the mix, on top of being positional, like 3D audio as well. I haven't had much luck with that actually. It just means that if you walk really far away, the sound will always be playing by a little bit, like however much you determine. But I'm sure it's useful for some stuff. Probably speech. It'd be good for speech, because generally in films you keep speech somewhat in the centre of the mix as well as being positional. There's another creepy dude in here who was in my trailer. Dave Foley. I need to update that name. Apparently that's like a name of a wrestler or something. I didn't know that. It was just a random name I picked. But yeah, this light here is also fuzzing on and off. What else can I talk about sound? Let's go and have a look at some of the systems behind this, because that's probably a bit more interesting. Right, so... Oh, here's that room, by the way, that I forgot to turn on earlier. Just make it a bit more visible, turn gizmos off. Yeah. So, like, just a side bit. All my rooms in this building are sort of separated in the hierarchy here. Second floor, first floor, ground floor, start room, template room. etc. Makes it a lot easier to manage, and also when it comes to optimizing this, it's should be a lot more handy there, because like I can turn rooms on and off as you're navigating around when line of sight aren't made. All this stuff, this building shit here, this is all for when you go outside on this balcony, and you can like, it's a fixed camera angle, so it doesn't, you can kind of see where it looks like the building's half finished, but from the camera angle that you see, which is something like this, you don't see any of the rough edges, and obviously you've got like lighting and fog on and stuff. The lighting updates when you go outside as well, because I need to have this black fog for the interiors to make the hallways look like dark at a distance, and then when you go outside it swaps out for the sort of lighter, more Silent Hilly sort of fog. So that's handled by a trigger here. Anyway, we're not talking about that, we are talking about audio. So let's go up, have a look at some of these. So I've got reverbs. I didn't talk about reverbs. Okay, it doesn't matter where these are positioned. There's the gizmos. Yeah, this is like the apartment block. It looks a mess, but I promise it's fairly organised. So I've got a reverb. I only did this recently. I can't really quite remember what I was doing. Oh yeah, so I've got like, you see in the reverb zone here, you have minimum distance, maximum distance. Now reverb zones in Unity, there you go. There you can see it now. It's this big circle, big sphere. So for some reason, reverb zones in Unity are spheres, and unlike like colliders and other like triggers and stuff, you can't set a 3D object as their shape. So if you think about like the reverb for a hallway, you would want it to be a rectangle, right? So you can set a long rectangle for along this hallway, a long rectangle along this one, and do it for each floor. That'd be great. And then therefore when you go into like a room that's a living room, this reverb from the hallway isn't going to affect this living room. Unity doesn't let you do that, which is just super weird to me. I'm sure there's like some other way of doing it, but what the approach I came to was the reverb zones now encompass basically the whole building. So like the hallway is as big as the entire building, same with living room, bathroom. These are just the ones I've set up so far. And what I'm doing is using this controller that I've made in Playmaker, super simple. I just send an event, so when you walk into a living room, like that room we were just in, it sends the off event to the hall reverb, which sets the property of this to enabled false. And then if you were to turn it on, it's setting it to enabled true. And basically there'll be, if we go back to this room, this is the hotspot. This is all Adventure Creator, the hotspots and triggers, by the way. So we've got hotspot, and it calls this action list, second floor, room 11, inspect. This is a bit of spaghetti, but basically it checks at the start whether you're in the room or out of the room. If you're out of the room, it then does all the stuff you need to do to enter the room, like opening the door animation, disables Mika's control. These third-party playmakers, that's how I can talk to Playmaker from Adventure Creator. So it's events. It's all events. It's sending a disable control event, steady feet event. Okay, so the feet should have not glitched out when we went through that door. So that's something I need to look on. And there you go. It's turning the fog on and stuff. Turning off the black fog, turning on the more like whitish, Silent Hillish fog. So when you go outside, it looks right. And then somewhere in here, here you go, third-party Playmaker, reverb hall, off. So it's going to that, saying off. And that's disabling the hall reverb. And then reverb living room, on, sending on, enabling the living room reverb. And if you don't know what reverb is, it's kind of, it's not an echo. It's similar. It's basically like, you know, when you walk into different rooms, they have different acoustics. So halls generally, if you were to like clap your hands in a hall, you'd hear a clap, but you'd also hear like this sort of, I'm trying to stray away from saying echo, because echo is technically a different effect, but it's sort of like an echo. You can hear it reverberate down the hall. The sound, the way the sound bounces off the walls affects how the sound is. And in a living room, it's a smaller room. There's carpet, which is a soft material which absorbs sound. So for a living room, it's a different sound. So you need reverb zones based on rooms. What the reverb zones do is affect these, which are the sound sources. So this is just a light sound source next to a green light. If I turn gizmos off a sec and lighting on, you can sort of get a better understanding. Zoom in. So yeah, there's a exit sign here. It has an electrical hum sound effect. We look down here. The reverb zone mix is set to 1. There it is, spatial blend. So this is set to fully 3D. If I set it to 2D, it wouldn't be based on position at all. 3D, it's fully based on position. And this is, so you have an audio source, which is the place that plays the sound, and then everything is fed through an audio listener. If we go to my main camera, here we go, audio listener. I can't even expand that. That's weird. I would have thought there'd be some sort of settings on that, but that means there's no settings. So the audio listener is basically what hears all of these audio sources, and it sends it to that. So because that's on the main camera, whenever I swap camera, so if I swap to a fixed perspective or the sort of more third-person perspective that's behind Mika, or for like cutscene camera angles and stuff, sound is always relative to where that camera is, which, you know, means that when you're walking around and the camera's behind your back, when it goes underneath one of these lights, you get that sort of 3D sound as the sound passes overhead. I'll have a look at the footsteps now for Mika. Just open. Mika's a prefab, which basically, how do I explain prefabs? It's like a way of saving part of your game that's like independent of scenes. So if I go to my project, select. Can I not select prefab? Oh, apparently. Hold on. Select prefab asset from the scene. Here we go. I've got like a million of these because I keep backing them up in case I like just duplicate them in case I change something and break something. But yeah, it's in a folder called My Prefabs, and it's basically independent of scenes. So if I was to open it, anything I change when this is open, it's almost like its own little scene. So I change anything on Mika and go back to like the apartment block here or like an exterior location, any other scene, this will automatically update to those scenes. Let's go down to the footstep controller. Where is it? Footstep sounds. So this is how we handle footsteps. State 1, set game object, hit object 0. So when it starts, it's just making sure that's empty, making sure the thing that it's hitting isn't anything. It then checks if you're running. So I've got another FSM to check if you're running called a running check. It's super simple. It's just setting the float for movement in my sprint multiplier. I won't go into that, it's not that complicated, but it's basically getting the run button, checking if the run button's down. If it's down, it's setting a multiplier, which doubles your speed, and setting a float value, which is telling the other FSM whether or not you're sprinting. And then if you let go of it, it goes back. So this is always running, and it's just like you hold sprint, it goes to this state, you let go of sprint, goes back to this one. So yeah, this is checking whether you're running or not. It's checking the Boolean value is running, which was set in that last FSM. It's getting it from that FSM, and then it's testing it if you're running or not. The only reason I need that is because when you're walking, it's setting the volume to a random float between 0.1 and 0.2. And when you're running, it's setting it between 0.2 and 0.4. So it kind of doubles the volume for when you're running. So we've got a raycast that comes from footstep detect raycast, which is a game object, which is down here. So all it is an empty game object. There's nothing on it. And it's positioned at the bottom of Mika's feet. Go back to the footstep controller. So it's raycasting downwards at a distance of 0.2, and it's storing whatever it hits in the hit object. It then takes the hit object and compares its tag. So every game object in Hollowbody has a tag. Most Unity games, in fact, I think probably every Unity game works like this. Some of these are left over from different testing things, like hover collision and hover damage. At one point you could control a hover car. You definitely can't in the finished game. That was way too big scope-wise for me, but so ignore them. But we've got concrete, metal, wood, dirt, carpet, and also wall for something else. But these are the ones that are currently determining sound. So it checks if it's concrete. If it's true, then it goes to this one. If it's false, it checks the next one, which is physical object. And at the moment, that just plays the concrete sound. Checks if it's metal, wood, sends the wood sound, carpet, dirt. You get the idea. So yeah, the concrete is quite simple. It's just this is why I love Playmaker, by the way. Like, you would have to code this loop yourself, and it would, most of the time you'd end up copying and pasting it from Google somewhere, because it's just easier to do that with coding for simple stuff like this. But yeah, it's just got an action for it. So this is the action browser. Might as well check whilst we're here. So if I was to type in play random, it's got an audio play random action, and you just drag that in, set how many audio clips you want to be within the thing, within like the loopy array, I guess it's an array. So 7 audio clips I've got for footsteps. You can set the weight, so this is like the chance of how likely they are to play. They're all set to 1 because I want them all to be equal. And then the volume of how loud it plays at. Apologies, my phone just vibrated. So volume is set here when we do that random float. And there, when it's finished, once it's played that sound, it sends the finished event, which sends it back to here, and it just waits. Now you see this little event here called footstep. That is what the animation controller is sending. So let me close this window, go to Mika, animation, humanoid walk, Mika. Yeah, that's the one. Right. So we got these animation events up here, send event. And it says function send event string, so it's a string event as opposed to like a Boolean or whatever other types of variables there are. And it sends the string footstep. So all that is doing is just, let's have a look at Mika a sec. Turn off gizmos. Gizmos, they just get in the way of everything. They're like important, but also really annoying. Anyway, Mika's walk. So yeah, this is her walk, and you can see that on the very first frame, I send an event for a footstep because her foot is contacting with the floor, and then I send another event there, where her left foot contacts with the floor, another event there, where her foot hits contact again, and then the loop cycle and the walk cycle ends and loops back to the start. So yeah, like I say, sending the footstep event. If we go over to Playmaker, back to Mika, yeah, this is the bit, footstep, right here. It sends it to check running, and it checks if it's running. So as long as my walking animations, or running animations, or like walking upstairs, or climbing over something, as long as I send events on each time the foot makes contact with the ground that say footstep, it will always send the event to this thing, and this thing handles all the code for it. So really nice, really easy way of doing footsteps. You can do footsteps by raycasting to check distance to the ground and checking every time the raycast collides. So if you have a really short raycast on the bottom of each foot, you can like check exactly when it hits. But that like opens itself up to a lot of like double triggers, like it might randomly hit twice or it might not quite hit right. If you send events via your animation, you're guaranteed to get those footsteps. So, just a little something else that I thought would be fun to show you. Just a little bit of some of the combat sounds that I've designed. I'll go into the process of how these are made a little bit, but I'll just show you a little bit of the gameplay of it. So this is my project for the enemy noises. You'll notice the waveform on these tracks is identical for these track 1 and 2. Track 1 and 3. Track 2 isn't used at the moment, so we don't need to worry about that. If I just play one of these. So it's going for like a really kind of breathy, like their whole respiratory system is really messed up. They're having trouble breathing. These are biomechanical monsters. They're mutated biomechanical monsters. So they have like random growths throughout their body that restrict their breathing. Yeah, nasty stuff. If I just mute this track, and turn the effects off of this track, this is the bass recording. Yep, that's me going, making that kind of noise. So what I did here was layered up some effects on top of that. So I've got an octave pitch that pitches it all an octave down, a little bit of distortion to try and channel that sort of biomechanical sound, and then a tiny bit of reverb. You can see here the wet channel is really low. It's just a little bit because, as we were talking about before, a lot of the reverb's handled in Engine, but just to help it sit nicely in this recording, I added a little bit here. So just that, playing with those effects, sounds like this. It's getting a little bit of digital kind of like artifacts coming in from the pitch down. I'm sure there's probably a better pitch plugin, but when it's in the mix, I think it sounds okay. So we mute that one a sec, and then we'll unmute this one, turn off the effects. This is exactly the same file. But if I look at the effects on this one has been pitched up, not a whole octave, just a little bit, by sort of 7.8, almost 8 semitones. Everything else I've left straight. I've added a chopper, which is effectively, it like cuts the audio in and out. So it like automates the volume to randomly come like lower and higher. So it gives like kind of like a staggered sound to the recording. And then again, reverb and distortion. So if you play that one with all the effects. I'm sorry, it sounds brutal, but this is what you gotta do. So you can see like these little dots here, that's where it's automating the volume. It's kind of like a sequencer for drums if you've ever done electronic music. And so those, yeah, these two are just my voice, and when you hear them together, yeah, they kind of fill up, because one's really low and one's quite high, they sort of fill the middle ground nicely. And then all I've done is add in, I just solo these. This is a recording I got from Zapsplat of female breathing, I think. So effects on that are pitch shifter, EQ, which is taken out a load of the low end, and I've got 2 EQs on there. Okay, that shouldn't make, I mean, that's the same EQ, so I don't think that would make any difference, but so if we hear it without effects, that was the original recording, and then, yeah, just made it a bit more like restricted and breathy. Yeah, and then all together. So yeah, there we have it. A brief overview of the sound design in my survival horror game Hollowbody. I hope that helped a little to understand my approach to sound design and maybe helped explain the process behind the scenes that goes into designing sound for a game. Because this video went into more technical details than my last, I tried a different approach to recording. I'm sorry for the occasional clicks and bumps that might have picked up by my mic. I'm going to look into getting some sort of mount for my mic so it's not sat directly on my desk for the next video. Hopefully that'll help. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please gently tap that subscribe button, press the little bell thingy, and if there's anything you'd like me to cover in my next video, please let me know in the comments. I read everyone and I try to reply where I can. So thanks all, and here's to the next video. Bye, 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 bye.